Trade unionists in New Brunswick have voted for a resolution to declare any arms shipments bound for Israel to be hot cargo. That term refers to goods that unionized workers refuse to handle based on principles of solidarity. They passed the resolution last week at the NB Federation of Labour Convention in St. John. Union delegates met against a backdrop of Israeli strikes on Gaza that reportedly killed scores of Palestinian civilians. Video from one of those strikes showed the silhouette of a 7-year-old girl as she rushed to escape the flames of a burning building from an attack that killed her mother and siblings. Later in the week, activists rallied in Ottawa against a military trade show protesting what they called Canadian complicity with genocide in Gaza. About a dozen people were reportedly arrested, including a volunteer reporter from the independent news outlet The North Star. Kevin Levangie of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, who brought forward the arms embargo resolution here in New Brunswick, noted that there's a local precedent for workers refusing hot cargo.
The ILA local in St. John, 273, has a proud tradition of supporting workers everywhere by refusing to move hot cargo of various types. So one of the most prominent examples is back in 1979. Allied unions and the St. John District Labor Council picketed the port because there was a shipment of heavy water that was headed for Argentina, which was then under a military dictatorship. That heavy water would have been used in a nuclear reactor down there. So the workers refused to cross that picket line. They supported the international solidarity groups and their fellow trade unionists in opposing that shipment. Similarly, they refused to move, they being the longshore workers, refused to move armored vehicles during the Iraq War, or at least military equipment during the Iraq War that would have been supporting the U.S.-led war effort there. And as recently as 2018, I believe there were pickets in front of the St. John port about shipment of light armored vehicles from Canada to Saudi Arabia, which were being used in their war on Yemen.
The resolution also calls for the NB Federation of Labour to push for a federal embargo on arms exports to Israel, whether they are direct shipments or through a third party. Activists have called attention to a factory in Moncton that manufactures parts for Lockheed Martin's F-35 program. The jet fighters have reportedly been used to drop 2,000-pound bombs on the Gaza Strip.
Is it reasonable to expect that perhaps this kind of production could be treated as hot cargo by union affiliates of the Federation of Labor?
It's hard to speculate, and I think in some ways this is, if not first steps, maybe second steps. So the Federation of Labor had previously endorsed the international call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions on Israel for their conduct in occupying Palestinian territory, the ongoing siege of Gaza, their apartheid-like conditions. So some of the groundwork for this has been laid in the past, and this is one further step to sort of indicate that specifically we should be considering weapons to be hot cargo and refuse to move them as a part of this larger call for BDS. And ultimately, it is, I think, as a union organizer, I'll say it's ultimately an organizing question. So it's a question of making sure that we're communicating, those of us who are passionate about this issue, making sure that we're talking to the workers, we're talking to union affiliates that are involved in this sort of issue and explaining why this is something that involves them and why they should, risk potentially discipline at the work in order to, protect people in another part of the world who are undergoing a genocide. So, it's a question of solidarity, but it's also a question of organizing.
We'll go to the full interview with Kevin Levangie of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers in a moment. But first, the newly elected president of the NB Federation of Labour talks about his priorities and some of the other resolutions that came out of the recent convention. Stay tuned.
Some of the priorities are looking to obviously strengthen the labor movement by increasing affiliation. We know that there's a number of different organizations out there that aren't members of the Federation, so obviously we want to reach out to them and hopefully bring them into the House of Labour because we're stronger together. So we see the need for that, and hopefully they will as well. And as we talk about our resolutions, obviously that's what sets the course for us for the next 2 years. So we have quite a number of those to work on, and all the information that comes out of those, that's what's going to give us our direction. And we have our ongoing different things with health and safety issues. We have our coalition work that we're going to continue with tenant rights and things like that. So our resolutions are what we're going to be working on. So one of the big ones for me was about the resolution with automation in the workplace. So we're seeing this more and more now, whether it's the self-checkouts, and we're seeing it in some restaurants now where they have machinery come bring your food, things like that. So we're seeing a lot more automation go into the workplace. So we want to see an inquiry done about this and possible elimination of a lot of it, because what it is, it's taking away good paying jobs. It's taking away taxes, it's taking away revenue, revenue that we all rely on as taxpayers and citizens, right? We rely on that revenue to help us pay for all of our different things. So, when we don't have people paying for that, where's it going to come from, right? Could be the job cuts, and we can't afford cuts. Some of the other ones were privatization in for our healthcare clinics. That was a big one. It's something that we've been ongoing fighting for years and years, and privatization is ultimately something that we do not accept. We push back against it, and we'll continue to push back against it.
One of the resolutions calls for the expansion of postal services. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so CUPW workers, they've had an initiative years ago too, and it was around postal banking. So what they're doing is they're looking at expanding the different services, because we can see that some different services within the corporation might be down in some other parts. So the union has explored other opportunities to grow the business, to expand the business, but the corporation just doesn't seem like they want to listen to that either. It's almost like they're trying to sabotage themselves in a sense.
One of the resolutions pertains to Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code. People at the AGM resolved that the Federation of Labour will condemn the use of 107, which has been used to end numerous legal strikes. So can you talk about this resolution?
Yeah, this resolution, it's a very important resolution because it deals with back to work legislation. When a union goes on strike, when a local goes on strike, that's their last line of defense, right? That's the one thing that unions have in their arsenal to try to resolve an issue. At the end of the day, nobody wants to go on strike because it hurts the employee, hurts the employer, hurts the people that you provide that business or service for. So when a government uses something like Section 107 in the Canada Labour Code to legislate someone back to work, that's wrong and it's shameful, and we completely denounce that. We did have a panel actually at our convention, and we had Chris Delegates from PSAC, and we had Kevin Levangie from CUPW, and we had the Secretary Treasurer from the Canadian Labour Congress, Lily Chang, come down. And I couldn't think of a better name for it, and it's called disregarding workers' rights. And that's exactly what it is when you use Section 107 and sending somebody back to work through legislation, is disregarding workers' rights.
So there were two resolutions out of 21 that didn't pass. One on peace and disarmament, which demanded the disarmament of the major economic powers with a just transition to retrain workers involved in military production. Could you tell me why that one didn't pass?
That one didn't pass. There was actually lots of good debate on it, and I just, when I say debate, it's very respectful in the House of Labour. But there was just some debate on it back and forth because we do have union members that are in the military and things too. And sometimes, when we put forth resolutions, sometimes we don't think about how it might affect other sectors and things like that. So when people get up and they give their perspectives, and then people say, okay, and that's why we do debates. Sometimes you go, okay, I never thought of that. I didn't realize, different perspectives from different unions. And that's what makes the New Brunswick Federation of Labour unique, is we get different perspectives from different unions outside of our own sectors. So that's why it just, respectful debate back and forth, and they just ultimately decided that we need to support one another in all of our sectors.
And so I guess opposition from that mainly came from PSAC, which would have the military members, correct?
Yes. Yeah. They made everybody aware just of their roles and responsibilities and things like that, and their concerns, and ultimately at the end of the day, the majority of the members in the room respected that.
And there was another one on arms embargo against Israel, calling on affiliates to refuse to move arms shipments and declare it hot cargo. That one did pass.
Yes, that one did pass, yes. I think it's going to be an interesting one. It's definitely a hot topic, and it's definitely going to need a little bit more work. But I look forward to to trying to dive deep into that one and all the resolutions, because that's what the members said that they wanted us to do, and that's what we're going to do.
Well, thanks so much. I've been talking to Chris Watson, newly elected as president of the NB Federation of Labor. Thanks for speaking to the NB Media Co-op.
Yeah, thanks, David.
I'm on the line today with Kevin Levangie, a letter carrier and Atlantic Region Union rep for the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Thanks for joining me today, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.
So the Canadian Union of Postal Workers put forward a resolution at the recent AGM of the NB Federation of Labor, which passed, calling for the Canadian government to block all arms exports to Israel, whether they are direct shipments or through a third party. It also calls on Federation affiliates to refuse to move arms shipments to Israel and to declare arms shipments to Israel hot cargo. So first of all, what does this mean in practice? Will there be shipments blocked in the port of St. John, for example?
Well, it's calling on two groups, I guess, to make sure that this happens. So the first is the New Brunswick Federation of Labor to call on the Canadian government to make sure that they aren't shipping weapons to Israel in violation of their own order. So as recently as March 2025, the federal government was shipping or approved, I guess, the shipment of artillery shells from General Dynamics based in Quebec to the US, who then shipped some of those artillery shells on to Israel, clearly in violation of the decision of the federal government. And it's also calling on the Federation of Labor to organize its affiliates to refuse to ship these arms should they have come through any part of New Brunswick. So obviously the Port of St. John is
and that's happened before, hasn't it? There's some historical precedent for that happening in St. John. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the ILA local in St. John 273 has a proud tradition of supporting workers everywhere by refusing to move hot cargo of various types. So one of the most prominent examples is back in 1979. Allied unions and the St. John District Labor Council picketed the port because there was a shipment of heavy water that was headed for Argentina, which was then under a military dictatorship. That heavy water would have been used in a nuclear reactor down there. So the workers refused to cross that picket line. They supported the international solidarity groups and their fellow trade unionists in opposing that shipment. Similarly, they refused to move, they being the longshore workers, refused to move armored vehicles during the Iraq War, or at least military equipment during the Iraq War that would have been supporting the US-led war effort there. And as recently as 2018, I believe there were pickets in front of the St. John port about shipment of light armored vehicles from Canada to Saudi Arabia, which were being used in their war on Yemen.
Yes. So yeah, light armored vehicles being transported to the Saudis to fight in Yemen. And so at the time there were protests. That didn't actually result in those shipments being blocked, though, did it?
No, that's my understanding. Yeah.
Right. And so the resolution notes that Canada has promised an arms embargo on Israel, but that materials continue to flow through the United States, as you mentioned a moment ago. And here in Moncton, we have a company called Apex that makes component parts for the Lockheed Martin F-35 program, and in turn, one of the customers for that program is the Israeli Air Force, which receives massive subsidies, foreign aid from the United States to purchase jet fighters and other military material and equipment. So, is it reasonable to expect that perhaps this kind of production could be treated as hot cargo by union affiliates of the Federation of Labor?
It's hard to speculate, and I think in some ways this is, if not first steps, maybe second steps. So the Federation of Labor had previously endorsed the international call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions on Israel for their conduct in occupying Palestinian territory, the ongoing siege of Gaza, their apartheid-like conditions. So some of the groundwork for this has been laid in the past, and this is one further step to sort of indicate that specifically we should be considering weapons to be hot cargo and refuse to move them as a part of this larger call for BDS. And ultimately, it is, I think, as a union organizer, I'll say it's ultimately an organizing question. So it's a question of making sure that we're communicating, those of us who are passionate about this issue, making sure that we're talking to the workers, we're talking to union affiliates that are involved in this sort of issue, and explaining why this is something that involves them and why they should, risk potentially discipline at the work in order to, protect people in another part of the world who are undergoing a genocide. So, it's a question of solidarity, but it's also a question of organizing.
Hmm. And this does put pressure on Israel, doesn't it? And is an embarrass would embarrass the government, I suppose, too, to see these kinds of resolutions piling up in around the world. It, you know, whether or not it actually results in this material being blocked, resulting in material, let's say, inconvenience for the IDF on one hand, but on the other hand, it's kind of damaging to their international reputation, I suppose. Would you agree with that assessment?
I think that's right. Yeah, and I think that the reality of Israel is increasingly, I guess, diplomatically isolated around the world, and in a lot of cases, you see that the populations of various countries around the world, particularly in the Middle East, but elsewhere as well, are extremely critical and horrified by Israel's conduct. However, their governments don't necessarily reflect the priorities of their populations. And you see that as well in Canada, I think. I mean, the consensus and a growing consensus among the population here is that this has to stop. But our government doesn't necessarily reflect that. So, as many unions and other civil society organizations that can get issues like this on the books, pass resolutions, make it clear that this is a priority for many of us, I think it is really important to, as you said, increase that isolation of Israel. And there's the model to follow of a certain extent of the anti-apartheid campaign, particularly in the 80s and going on into the 90s. South Africa found itself increasingly isolated, and ultimately it was I think internal kind of ruling class politics in that country that said we can't continue like this because we can't do business with the rest of the world while we're committing the crime of apartheid at home.
Okay, and you're involved with Labor for Palestine. What is Labor for Palestine?
Sure, yeah. Labor for Palestine is a cross Canadian organization of trade unionists and labor activists who are, critical of the state of Israel and their conduct and supportive of the Palestinian people and particularly Palestinian workers who suffer enormously, obviously in Gaza and from the ongoing genocide, but on previously from the system of apartheid that made it, very difficult for people to hold down work, depending on the decision of a border guard in a particular area along the wall separating the West Bank from Israel. And yeah, we're very supportive of Palestinian liberation and particularly the Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions on the state of Israel because of their various crimes.
And Kevin, could you just talk briefly about why this is important for you?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, I spoke a little bit earlier about the ILA example in St. John and hearing about the no hot cargo for Argentina movement back in the 1970s. And I grew up on the west side of St. John. I knew dock workers growing up, and my parents would point them out in church or on the street and say, those are the guys who blocked these shipments from going to Argentina. That was really inspiring for me. That's why part of the reason anyway why I wanted to be a union activist is because of their example of international solidarity. So that's inspired me from the very beginning. But ultimately, I mean, people around the world, anyone of conscience, I think, is really waking up to the crimes that Israel's committing. day in and day out on Palestinians and on, Lebanese people and Iranians and other people in the general neighborhood, Syrians as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's impossible to look on and I think not be moved to take some sort of action, however you can. And as workers, I think we really have the ability to hold, the bosses and our governments to account in a way that other people can't. Promises that aren't worth much from the federal government can kind of be backed up by action from workers who know when you're being sold a bill of goods and know that false promises of a two-way arms embargo aren't going to cut it. It's going to come down to us refusing to move arms and ultimately other goods, I think, to and from Israel to really make a difference.
Now, there was another resolution at the AGM, the NB Federation of Labor, from the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, CUPW, your union, calling for the disarmament of the major economic powers. And this was one of the only motions that did not pass at this AGM. I understand it was ultimately voted down after the Public Service Alliance of Canada, or PSAC, raised concerns about their own members who are involved in the military. Any comment on that?
I think, as I said earlier, it's ultimately an organizing question too, and I think the resolution included that we really want to see a just transition as we hopefully move away from military expenditure on the whole in Canada. So ultimately, I think it's a question of justice abroad, but it is also a question of justice at home. And fundamentally, I think the peace and disarmament movement, and of which CUPW has historically been a proud member, really needs to foreground that this is about moving the expenditure away from death and destruction towards social justice at home and abroad. So ultimately, if there's a cut in military expenditure, we want to see an equivalent increase in social expenditure. And the idea that any union member would be left behind is not something that we would ever sign up for, or any worker for that matter. So I think it's a question of building bridges between unions and making sure that if we bring forward a resolution like that in the future, we really explain sort of our set of priorities.
And it is there in the resolution, isn't it, that you're calling for? I have the text in front of me here, that the Federation of Labor will develop and support efforts for a just transition to retrain workers involved in military production. And so, yeah, I guess can you elaborate on that? How you see that, how you see that happening in practice?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's in terms of military production, obviously that doesn't necessarily mean PSAC members. That they're generally, my understanding, is support staff on military bases. But ultimately, there are plenty of development projects that need to take place at home and abroad, and a lot of the people who work in these, whether it's again manufacturing sectors or in assisting with logistics of our military expenditure at home, have skill sets that are transferable to helping people fundamentally. And I think the other thing that I think we really need to foreground when we talk about this stuff is that the only real guarantee of peace and disarmament that we've ever seen in history is when workers and the working class around the world come together and say that we're not going to participate in militarism. And that's people of wealthy countries, that's people in poor countries, and everywhere in between who need to unite and advance this agenda of peace and prosperity for everyone. So again, a little light on details. There is an amazing example in the UK of a group of workers who worked in, I think it was jet production, military jet production, who came together themselves and said, we'd actually like to see the production of this facility shift towards social good rather than military expenditure. So it's not just people outside of the industries of military production who are calling for this. There are examples coming from within those industries as well.
Okay, and before we wrap up, you're a letter carrier. We're at the time of recording, Friday, May 30th. I think about a week into the period of strike action, which includes currently refusal of overtime. Can you give us the latest from your perspective? What's the what's the mood among your fellow members at this time?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think there's a real frustration about a lack of a commitment to free and fair collective bargaining, both on the federal government's part and on our employer's part. It's pretty obvious that there's collusion between the federal government and Canada Post to kind of jam us up. I mean, the reason why our strike was ended back in December and then we retreated to a 5 month pause, as they're calling it, is because they wanted to, not inconvenience Canada Post customers and not inconvenience Canada Post, but make sure that the workers would give up on any number of issues that are really near and dear to our hearts as we head back into strike action. So yeah, grim determination might sum it up best, I think. But
Hmm.
ultimately, especially for those of us with a little less seniority, right? So I have about seven years in at the post office. I really want this to be a place where I can retire from. But
Hmm.
it's looking increasingly difficult for that to be the case when the employer is trying to move as much, full-time work away from letter carriers onto part-time and part-time flex workers, either on the weekend or, to plug the gaps that they claim are in existence at the post office and move more and more work away from jobs that you can actually, rent an apartment on or potentially buy a house or, raise a family or even just feed yourself. Like this is what it's really about. It's about the future of work at the post office and elsewhere. And it's really frustrating to be in this position once again, but here we are.
Well, anything to add before we wrap up, Kevin?
No, I just think that, if you're a union member and you'd like to get more involved in Palestine solidarity, you should reach out to Labor for Palestine Canada. We have a website present on a lot of different social media platforms, and it's a really strong group of people who are doing our part to try to make sure that Canada is not complicit in the Israeli crimes that are ongoing. And similarly, if you're happen to be near a CUPW rally or potentially a picket line, depending on how things shake out in the next little bit, we'd love to have you stop by, introduce yourself. Coffee and donuts are great, so are bags of apples. Once you've had enough donuts to last you for a lifetime on the picket lines. So, yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thanks so much. I've been speaking to Kevin Levangie, a letter carrier and Atlantic Region Union Rep for the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Thanks again, Kevin.
Thank you.